Okay, Luciana, it's just about to click to 10:30, so if you could start the recording, please.
Okay, I have just started the recording.
Thank you very much. And can I say thank you to everybody for hanging on. I apologise that we've taken up half an hour of your valuable time, but thank you for staying with us. Can I welcome Ian Thomas, who's joining us from the Pru, and in the same sentence also share sadness that unfortunately Jay, whose contribution and dedication to education and pupils and families in Woking as a professional and as a friend, and will be sorely missed, having passed away in the last month or so. And for those that may not have had the opportunity personally to say thank you, I'm sure you'd like me and School Forum and others to extend sincere condolences to Jay's family, friends, and her colleagues. But nevertheless, welcome Ian to the meeting. We've also got Chris Conniam from Bullmarsh, who's on the call. Chris is standing in for Amanda Woodfin, the head teacher at Bullmarsh, and Amanda herself has taken over from Nick McSweeney, who was the head teacher of Embrook. Embrook, as many of you may be aware, is transitioning from maintained to academy on the 1st of April, and Amanda is stepping in to take Nick's place. With that brief introduction, could I start by looking at the agenda and asking if there are any apologies for non-attendance? Luciana, I think you've got a couple of items to raise.
Yes, I have apologies from Ginny Rhodes, and I think you covered the other points about Chris substituting Amanda.
Thank you. Has anybody else been notified of any absences that they'd like to share? If not, thank you. If we can move on from apologies to any other business, minutes of the last meeting. Could I initially ask if there are any factual corrections that colleagues have identified and would like us to make to these minutes? Hi, Shirley. Yes, I can see your hands up.
Sorry, I think that's a legacy hand. Let me pop it down.
Sorry.
That's not a great start. Apologies.
No problem. Hi, Kerry.
Hi.
Are there any factual corrections to the minutes? I can't see any hands up. If not, thank you. I will sign these at the most appropriate opportunity as an accurate record of our meeting from the 13th of January. Can I move swiftly on to matters arising? You would have. I've got some feedback. Could we just check that everybody's got their microphones off, please? Thank you. Sorry, otherwise that's great. Thank you very much. There is a document behind the minutes called Matters Arising. Lynn and Catherine, I think you've helped shape the first couple of items there. Could you just run us through insurance and school admissions?
Yep, certainly, Paul. Thank you. Hopefully you can. That's popped up on the screen if that's helpful for everyone. So in terms of insurance arrangements for maintained schools, so Forum will be aware that obviously this has been an ongoing discussion over the last sort of 6 to 9 months, given the DfE's decision to extend the RPA arrangement to maintained schools. We'd obviously taken a decision previously that we would no longer offer it insurance through the dedelegated route as we had in the past, and we'd therefore been looking at what alternative funding and charging opportunities could be for the coming financial year. I think we've recognised through all of this there has been no ideal solution. Clearly the RPA rate for maintained schools is far below anything that the council could secure through commercial insurance arrangements, given that is a commercial arrangement through insurance brokers as opposed to the RPA, which is obviously a scheme, not insurance in the typical sense, but is effectively a scheme that's underwritten by the DfE. So the route that we've taken, the decision that the council has taken, and that's been communicated out to all schools, so just to confirm to Schools Forum, is that we looked at the insurance that was previously charged through the dedelegated route, and then the contents insurance offer that went out as part of the almost sort of traded offer, if you like. And we've rolled that together into one core offer to maintain schools for the coming financial year. We looked at that in terms of looking back at if we'd taken that approach previously to look at what the average cost for the current year has actually been per pupil for maintained schools, and that ranged from sort of £37 per pupil to £49 per pupil. So clearly a significant difference away from the £19 on the RPA. What we then looked at was, well, in terms of if we took the approach to look at using the October 2020 census to charge on a per pupil basis and rolling all of those elements into that core offer together, the actual cost would be around £38 per pupil, which would obviously offer a reduction for a number of schools, but clearly still, well out of kilter with the RPA arrangement. We've talked about before, obviously, about the financial implications for the council and on the council's general fund side and through council tax funded budgets, given that the current insurance contract runs through until the summer of 2023. So work was done with insurance and corporate finance colleagues to look at, through utilising use of insurance reserves, how we could try and meet somewhere in the middle. So as I said earlier, there is no ideal solution to this. What we've tried to look at is something that recognise the pressure on schools' budgets sitting within the DSG, but obviously the impact on core council budgets as well. The offer, therefore, that we put out was a £26 per pupil for the new core insurance offer to maintain schools. Who's taking up on that offer is still being finalised, but the feedback from insurance colleagues is it's a pretty much sort of 50-50 split so far, and those that have decided to stay with the council for the coming financial year, and those that are choosing to make their own arrangements or go through the RPA. It's clearly something that we need to keep under review, and that dialogue, and my commitment is to keep that dialogue open with insurance colleagues. They're obviously looking at the dialogue with our insurance provider, given the length of the contract that we've got, to see how we can find the best to minimise the financial implications all round as we take that forward. But clearly, given the decisions by schools and the lower rate that the RPA offer, I think there's a natural progression to whether actually we continue to offer, the council offers any insurance for maintained schools at all. But I think it's about keeping that dialogue open as we go through the next months and year to review that situation.
Thank you, Lynn. Comments from colleagues? I have a comment that I'm concerned that you're heading in a direction where effectively you're pricing the Wokingham provided insurance out of the market, and the borough is going to be left with a bill, with an invoice from the insurance company through until summer 2023, and few, if any, schools taking that insurance, which seems counterintuitive. So I might ask you to look again at where you need to position that pricing to at least recover some of the funds that you are going to be paying out to the insurance company, whether one school or 20 schools take up the insurance. It seems there's some economics in there that needs to be considered quite quickly.
Absolutely, Chair. I'll certainly feed that back to colleagues. Like I say, that it's not. It's been a difficult situation because we've tried, as I said earlier, there is no ideal solution in this at all. Part of the reason it took us so long to come to an arrangement was trying to consider a whole number of options and models in terms of what the best outcome might be. I think, as I said, all I can do is, I'm not an insurance expert, but I certainly have my commitment to ensure that we keep that dialogue open with corporate and insurance colleagues as things progress.
Okay, thank you. If there are no further questions, could you take us on to the response for school admissions?
Yeah,
So,
I hand to Sal.
Yeah, so in terms of the school admissions task and finish group, we did hold our first meeting at the beginning of the year and formally adopted the terms of reference that had been previously circulated as draft to Schools Forum for information. There were a few minor tweaks made to the terms of reference within the meeting, which was then adopted. We will recirculate out the final terms of reference to everybody so that you have a copy. One of the key areas then was looking at what the work plan for the task and finish group would be, and a number of areas were highlighted. So, review of the admissions arrangements, and in that's about the way in which admissions are processed and operated within the local authority, and therefore the timeliness and dialogue with schools and with parents in relation to admissions arrangements. Linked to that was to undertake some review around the capacity within the school's admissions team. And by capacity, that's both staffing capacity as highlighted here, but also thinking about the systems capacity within the team as well. It was felt that it would be helpful for colleagues to have a real clear kind of timeline of the key kind of pinch points or the key kind of activity timeframes that the school admissions team operates to. So we're going to develop that kind of timeline approach that just gives an overview of the cyclical nature, the annual cyclical nature of the activity undertaken. Yeah. Another area was the commencement of the consultation of the fair access protocol. So that was commenced at the beginning of this month in March, and it runs through to the 12th of April, where we're inviting comments on the draft fair access protocol. And then another key area was a review of send placement processes and practices in relation to school admissions. That ties in both in terms of the admissions arrangements, but clearly also in respect of our improvement agenda around an innovation agenda around children with special educational needs and disabilities. So we're building up a small work programme which will be presented to the task and finish group at the next meeting. It should be noted as well, although it's not in this this update, in that we've now recently appointed to a new school admissions and transport manager post, who will be a key lead in terms of the task and finish group. And that's where we are in terms of the update on school admissions.
Thank you for that. Great, thank you. I note that we've been asked to have any other business item about admissions. So can we put a pin in this at the moment, unless anybody's got some very direct questions to Sal on this update that we've got in front of us? Otherwise, I'd like to come back to admissions as any other business item at the end of the meeting. So if I can't see any hands asking questions of Sal specifically about that update, there aren't, then yes, I can. So I can see a hand, but I can't tell who it is. So forgive me, please.
It's Chris Collier, Paul.
Ah, great, thank you.
It's only as long as we have a time at the any other business, so we can discuss some of the idiosyncrasies, issues that we've had with admissions for this year. I totally understand that the task finish group will be looking for the way we move forward, but I think it's important that we can share some of our concerns about the way it's been administered this year.
Chris, that's what I intend to give you at the end. Yep, we should have an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, cool, thank you.
Thank you. The next matters arising, you'll note in the document pack you've got, as requested by colleagues at School Forum, I collated all of the questions that had been raised by individual head teachers and members of School Forum around the SEND consultation, and sent those to Sal shortly before the consultation closed in January. So you can see the questions that were asked. Sal, I'm assuming that at some stage, one of your team, one of the project team, will come back and answer those questions.
Yeah, we are working through all of these in terms of being able to respond to the questions.
Lovely.
So yeah, we will circulate something.
Thank you very much. It's quite possible that a couple may come up as we go through the session a little bit later on with the SEND agenda item, sorry, the high needs block agenda item that we've got in here, where I know there's a whole raft of new statistics for us. Lynn, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was just going to add that what we've tried to do is address as many of the sort of finance and activity related questions in the high needs block report as we can. But obviously, if there's anything that we feel is not being picked up properly, we can expand on that further.
Great, thank you very much. If there are no further matters arising, and if nobody can see anything from the minutes that we have missed, then I'd like to move on to agenda item 43, which is revenue monitoring report. And if we're lucky, I can't see Catherine's name on the list. Hopefully her Wi-Fi is back in order.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Welcome, Catherine. If you could take us through the revenue monitoring, please.
Yeah. Sure, hopefully you can all see that. Schools Forum asked to note the contents of the report. As at the end of February, we are predicting an in-year deficit of 2.86 million, which with our carry forward deficit is 6.22 million. That's a movement of 109,000, which is to do with the update of the uplifted SIPC contract costs, and also the amount for direct payments and personal budgets and tutoring has increased as well, and that's due to this being the unusual COVID year. We've had to make reasonable adjustments, and with school closures and things, there's been bespoke packages arranged to keep tutoring our SEN children.
Could you decode SIPC for me, please?
Children and young people and therapy, is that it?
Intensive therapy.
So it's the therapy costs like physio, occupational therapy and speech and language.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's it basically. We've just slightly gone back up again. It's gone back to what we said we were in December. I don't know if anyone's got any questions on any particular line items.
So in summary, we're £109,000 slightly
over from January. Yeah.
Worse than we had anticipated being from our previous position, and our expected loss for the year, expected difference between income and expenditure in the year is now 3.6 million. 2.86 million, which gives, with the 3.6 million brought forward or whatever, is a 6.2 million expected shortfall of an expected loss or reserve shortfall in total carried forward.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from colleagues on the revenue monitoring report? I can't see any coming through. Thank you, Catherine. Could we move on to item 44, which is the contingency update?
Yeah, absolutely. Because Schools Forum note the contents of these reports as well. The de-delegated contingency fund hasn't been drawn on still this year, and we've agreed to carry this forward to next year so that we still have the contingency pot de-delegated for maintained schools, but they don't have to actually contribute next financial year because we will carry this amount forward that hasn't been used this year. Also, just to note that for early years, we've literally only just got through the headcount data for this term, so we won't be able to say how much of the provider reserve fund has been used until after we've gone through those data. So we won't be able to let Schools Forum know until July meeting.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any questions on the contingency update? Yep, I can see a hand up. Forgive me, I can't see who it is. I've just got a hand, so please open your mic and chat.
Hi, Paul, it's Ian.
Yeah, hi.
Catherine, that figure then, how does that factor in terms of the potential recoupment and the actual budget for this year in the early years?
This year's in next year from April, do you mean?
Yeah. I mean, we got that big recoupment line that's been factored in.
Yeah, so whatever basically whatever hours we have used this year, that's what we're going to get paid for. So we're anticipating that it's gone down a bit, so that there's going to be a big recoupment amount in July next year, which we'll come on to later in the budget paper. So we're just still working through the data now, but obviously we know whatever hours have been used, the settings will get paid for.
Okay, I'm more interested in the 2020 headcount figure and the impact on the actual budget moving forward, but obviously pick that up in the next item.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Catherine, I have a recollection somewhere that we were going to enhance this particular report to show, for want of better, the early years. I know it's going to get reallocated, but that early years provision, just so that we don't lose sight of the fact that there is that little buffer that's kept there. And I also wonder, given the size and pressures on things like the growth fund, which is also a contingency, whether we should consider adding a piece to this that shows out of the growth fund contingency, i.e. the £800,000, what has been allocated at each point during the year, which Piers can then speak to when he joins the meeting, but we can keep a track of when he may not be at the meetings.
Yes, we can. Yeah, we definitely do that. I think we normally talk about that all in July, don't we, the growth fund, but yeah, we can have it as an ongoing item, definitely.
Thank you. So what effectively we're doing is we're then tracking the three buffers, the three contingencies that we have, albeit early years will always go back out to early years, but the other two may not go back out, may not be fully spent during the year.
Yeah, that's
Thank
fine.
you. Any other questions on the contingency update? Okay, I can see no hands up. If I can move on to agenda item 45, the early years block budget. So Ian, actually, if I can sort of come back to you as, forgive me, chair and of the task and finish group. Kerry, thank you also for your contribution. My understanding from what I'm reading is that the task and finish group met and have come back with this as a recommendation. So if I can hand over to you to share what your outcomes were, please.
Thanks, Paul. Yes, we met maybe a month ago, was it now?
Yeah.
And discussed the budget going forward. I had concerns over that we were budgeting based on 2020 census data, and I have further concerns going forward, in sense that as Catherine's alluded to, there is that with the headcount just come back from the DFE, I'm guessing that it's a lot lower than where we were last year. I have to say, I only saw the agenda pack last week in terms of the actual tables. Finance and the early years team had talked about passing on the full uplift of the that was put out in the autumn update budget, which equates to 6p for 3 and 4 year olds and 8p for 2 year olds, which obviously we're all very happy about to have an uplift. My concern is that the budget's been based around 2020 figures, and although the DFE has guaranteed funding from last year for the summer and autumn term, spring was based on actuals, and numbers are significantly lower, and I'm concerned that we've got a big recoupment coming in, which is around about 600k, which was listed in table B. And my question to Catherine, actually, and sorry, Paul, this is not me saying this is our recommendation, is this realistically a balanced budget? Looking at the figures that you have for PTEs in there, that PTE that you've got there is not what the 2020 census was. So I'm assuming that's the estimate for the census in 2021.
It is actually the 2020 figures that we've had through.
The PTE for 2020 was 3,700. So there is a variance of 253 PTEs that you're using in the budget.
Yeah, so the 3728 is what we've been given as income from the DFE, and I've gone through all the census from 2020 and got that from January. That's the January 2020 census numbers, right, rounded up, annualized, basically. So that's where that figure has come from, and that's why we have the recoupment figure below. Yeah, you did send an email this morning with all these queries, and obviously haven't had a chance to look at it, go through each point yet with you, but we did agree, we did recommend that at the finish group that we'd still have the 5% top slice, which is what we need to agree at this meeting. So we will work through those figures with you. I'll come back to you later on today to go through your questions. But if we can agree in principle to the 5% top slice, then we can actually pinpoint the actual amount that it will be once we've gone through those figures, go through the task and finish group, and then come back.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you. And Kerry, did I see you're also at the TNF group?
Yes, yeah. So we did really agree in principle, and whether we wanted money coming up front or not. For ourselves, we've always had monies arrive up front and then you have it clawed back, so it was no different. But I think for many early years providers, it would be a worry and how they would manage and budget that. But in principle, we'd agreed, yeah.
So if I can understand the document we have presented in front of us, which we're going to be asked to consider and recommend its approval or not, is probably a good position from the task and finish group, but there may be, based upon some of the issues that Ian has raised, there may be enhancements to that information that come out over the next period of time that we could ask you to feed back into this group. Is that a reasonable assessment of where we are?
Admittedly, I haven't had time to look properly at Ian's email either. I have had a little flick through. He's clearly much better with the figures than I am, I have to say. I would say that was pretty good.
Then, Ian, what I'd like to suggest is that we consider this report as tabled, as, for want of a better word, the best information that we have available now to consider as the early years budget, but recognise that based upon some of the questions you've asked, that the task and finish group may well want to take this further forward as more information becomes available, and perhaps come back at a future date with further observations on the figures. Does that sound, again, is that a reasonable approach for us to take for this meeting?
Just so two things, Paul. I'd like it minuted that I'm concerned that there is potentially a risk for an overspend, because this doesn't look like a balanced budget to me. And I know these are difficult times, and the early years allocations are tricky at the best of times, and in COVID times they're even more tricky. The second point I'd like to make is that it seems now with the early years budget that we've moved to just going, we can take 5%. So that's what we're going to do, because we need that for our statutory duties. Is taking the maximum the fair thing to do? Is it required, or could that be less? But in principle, yes, I'm happy to move forward, and we feedback in later.
Okay, thank you. Catherine, do you just want to respond to those two very specific issues that Ian raised, and then we'll move forward to consider the recommendations?
Okay, so a potential risk of overspend. It's hard to say. We will get funding for whatever hours are taken by settings, whatever put in the headcount, we will get the funding back for that.
Catherine, do you want me?
Yes, thank you.
Sorry, just so I think Ian, we completely understand your concerns. I suppose the budget has been set based on, in conjunction with finance and the early years team, and obviously in discussion in the wider task and finish group, as informed as we possibly can make it. I think obviously your latest comments that have come through, we can obviously work through that with you so that we're sure that we've got consistency of understanding. Clearly we are not in usual times and there are no guarantees on anything, but the joint view is that we minimise that risk as far as we can in terms of that overspend. In terms of the 5%, again, obviously appreciate all budgets are tight. Costs are increasing for the council as well as settings, etc. And I wouldn't like to think it was just a sense that we were suggesting taking the 5% just because we could. We'd obviously agreed that approach for this year. There's certainly a number of things that we would like to see taken forward in terms of our internal processes, the use of systems for early years payments, etc., to try and make those effective as possible. So the sort of small additionality we get from continuing to take that 5% in terms of cash terms also supports us to be able to take forward some of that work within the council. It's certainly not a case of just taking it for the sake of it. It is about ensuring that we continue to develop and not just the front-facing early years service, but all the support that wraps around that as well.
Absolutely, and I'm always appreciative of the work that you do. I realise that we have to put a stake in the ground and set the budget. I just think that there are some risks this year.
Thank you, Ian. Yeah, clearly we will note those, although I'm sure even you don't want to come back going, see, I told you so. So I think
I would.
No. But if I can ask the task and finish group to potentially reconvene in a month or 60 days time and just revisit the area with any improved information that you have and come back to school forum with your findings on that. I think that would be useful in terms of just making sure we get the most accurate information possible. But I'd like to try and move forward and ask school forum formally whether we would approve the task and finish group's recommendation that the centrally retained element of the early years budget for 21-22 is 5%. So that's a formal request, please. If I could ask school forum members to raise their hands, please, or vote if they approve that recommendation. See hands raised. Luciana, are you able to
Yes, hands are starting to go up.
Yeah.
I only have 3 hands up at the moment.
I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
All right, so it's not showing for me, Paul. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm not showing either.
Luciana, for some reason my hand's blocked on this call. It's definitely not Molly Hill, but I support the.
Okay, then I'm not quite sure why technology isn't working with us. So could I spin the question around? I'm assuming that at the moment that recommendation is approved, but could I ask verbally, if there's anybody that is against that recommendation, could they speak if the hand process isn't working very well? Okay, so I've not heard anybody verbally come back and say, so therefore can we approve that recommendation unanimously, please? And then we note the details of the budget allocation as presented, but would ask the Task and Finish group, together with Lynn and Catherine and others, to come back at the next school forum meeting just to give us an update with the remaining information. Are there any further questions on the early years block budget? If not, then I'd like to move on to agenda item 46. If I can ask you, if you can, to take your hands down. I've still got some hands up at the moment. Oh, Kerry, I've got your hand up. That's no, okay, fine. Let's come down again. I hope others struggling with the same. Technology is not playing with the same. Okay, I've not got any verbal comments, so I'm going to move on if I can, but I note that there are still hands up. If I'm missing somebody's comment, please unmute yourself and just shout at me and tell me that you've got something to say, rather than rely. Sean, yes. Oh, no, Sean's hand's gone down. Sean, are you? No, that's gone. Okay, I'm moving on to item.
Sorry about that. I'm not on top of the IT either.
Don't worry. I always wonder when the Queen is on the television doing one of these teams. Can you imagine somebody saying, "Excuse me, Your Majesty, but you're on mute"? Agenda item 46, which is Sal, the high needs block budget. I'm sure you and Lynn, between you, can take us through this.
Yes, we can, and I think probably Lynn's actually better placed to start than I.
Yep, certainly so. So thank you, Chair. So the report today is obviously to consult with Schools Forum on the high needs block budget for the coming financial year. You will see that the format of this report, we've tried to provide, as discussed before and following the December meeting that we had, we've looked to supplement the sort of pounds and pence with some more activity information and assumptions that sit below that, to try and give a more rounded information base and visibility to it. There's obviously a lot of information there. I'm conscious that we're not going to have time to go through everything that's in there, but I'll take you through, propose to take you through the key points. I suppose the main thing would be to say that in terms of the activity information, etc., we've got, it's our first go at bringing something like this to you. I accept it probably won't be perfect. We will continue to develop as we go, but I'd be really keen to take views about how useful Forum think that this format is. So just in terms of taking you through the reports, we obviously know the context that we have in terms of high needs block and funding nationally. There's obviously a significant uplift in high needs block funding coming in from the DFE nationally across the piece, but clearly in Wokingham, as with many local authority areas, costs and demands continues to outstrip that uplift in resources. In terms of the specifics for Wokingham for the coming financial year, in terms of our proportion of the overall uplift that was announced nationally, there's an increase in our budget allocation of 2.28 million compared to this year. There is information in Appendix A in the report that just sets that out a little bit more in terms of, for anyone that wants to get techie on the funding formula, in terms of what specifics have moved within that. I think it is important to note it's not all of that is a sheer uplift. Pay and pension grants, for example, that settings had received directly have also been rolled into the high needs block baseline from 21-22 onwards. So we've had to take account of that in the process as well. So in terms of the funding formula uplift of 2.28, in addition to that, we obviously had 588,000 following the decision at Schools Forum about the 0.5% transfer from the schools block into the high needs block for the coming financial year. Clearly, that's, that combined additional funding is really good news. But when you take that against the backdrop of the in-year deficit that we have of 2.8 million, and the fact that we all anticipate that the number of EHCPs will continue to increase, clearly it's not the end of the solution by any manner of means, and it's just the next chapter in that journey. And what we've tried to set out in terms of approach today here is that builds on the conversations we've had previously and recognises the complexity of the fact that we know that much of the key to driving down cost is about having a local provision and being able to support children and young people in more cost-effective placements and settings within borough rather than very expensive out of borough. But there's a curve to get there, and the plan for 21-22 very much seeks to see how we start to and continue to invest in borough and continue to improve that to allow that longer term shift from the balance between out of borough and in borough. In terms of very specifics, if I can skip down a little bit. So again, we tried to set this out, so continuing the themes that we've looked at in previous meetings about sort of overall sort of setting categories, if you like, to try and set that out. So hopefully, again, that gives a bit more transparency and a bit of continuity around some of the information that's been presented across different meetings. Looking at mainstream, first of all, we've touched again, and it's been a well discussed situation through Schools Forum and through other means, that the funding formula and the way that annual top-ups are calculated for our local mainstream schools has remained static for a number of years and hasn't changed, hasn't even been inflated, and that clearly creates pressure when there's so much pressure on mainstream budgets as it stands. We have committed that there needs to be a longer term review of actually how we arrive at that, what the funding model and how that works. But basically we've recognised that actually we needed to do something for the current financial year to go somewhere to supporting mainstream schools to continue to provide support to children and young people in those settings. Given that we've also had the opportunity of the 0.5% that was transferred from the schools block, we considered as part of that, and again what was raised in Schools Forum previously about how we could target some of that resource to try and sort of feedback, recognising that came from schools budgets in the first place. So therefore what's proposed is that the top-up rate for mainstream schools, which is currently just over £422, will be raised by 5% to £443 for the 21-22 financial year. So that will kick in from April. We also had sight of some benchmarking information that Southampton City Council collated from other South East local authorities, because this is an area that everyone is struggling with, and everyone is looking at to see how we get funding models for mainstream schools correct. And that 44350 that's proposed for the coming financial year very much aligns with the sort of average rates across the other authorities that we had information from that benchmarking exercise. So we hope that's some good news. We appreciate it's only one small part of an overall jigsaw, but we hope that will be some welcome news for mainstream schools. In addition, the figures in the budget assume that in terms of increased activity as well, that there will continue to be an increase in activity in the number of children and young people with EHCPs that are supported in mainstream schools. And based on sort of trends of what we've seen, that assumption's been set that from September there would be a 15% rise. Again, all of this is set out in the activity appendix, and these are things that we would continue to monitor as we move through the financial year. Just before moving on from mainstream, one area that I just wanted to flag in the report is around post-16 place funding. So there's currently 27 post-16 places that are funded from our high needs block in mainstream secondaries. That's remained the same for a number of years. It's not something that has been reviewed recently. So again, that's something that we want to look at in conjunction with relevant settings as we move through the summer term, so we can consider whether that's still appropriate or whether we need to look to see whether there's anything we can learn from that in terms of what the places are and the reality of teenagers that are placed in those settings, and whether there's actually in conjunction with theirs and through that consultation we need to think about an amendment to those numbers going forward. But the process for doing that would be through the DfE's high needs place notification process, which happens in November each year. So any changes we wanted to think together through for that wouldn't be implemented until the 22-23 academic year. Moving on to resource bases. So obviously, as we all know, the review of resource base top-up funding continues. what we were trying to avoid doing in pulling these figures was to try and preempt what the outcome of that review was, and to try and second guess what that would look like. So the figures that are there are based on the current funding model, but they do, however, take account of the new secondary resource-based arrangements that are planned for this September. What we have sought to do in the numbers is make some assumptions, and a starting assumption that actually for the 21-22 academic year, we'll be able to make some inroads in terms of reducing the number of empty places in resource bases, given the work that's going on to align places with need. I know, Karina, I know you've raised something with me already, and I think it's obviously important to know the figures in the appendices as we move on in the activity are all based around Wokingham funded activity. So top-ups, when we come on to look at that in the activity numbers, don't necessarily reflect all of the pupils that pay top-ups into resource bases, for example. They are Wokingham funded pupils, so that there are some pupils in the resource bases that are where top-ups are funded by other local authorities. That's not reflected in the activity data, but that's certainly something we can look at to further enhance the information as we go forward. Similarly for Addington, if we feel that that's useful, the figures, as I said, are all based on, given that this is in the context of the budget setting for Wokingham, they're on Wokingham funded activity data. Moving on to special schools, so we know that the revised banding arrangements were rolled out for Addington during the current financial year and were implemented from April last year, and we did commit to looking to reviewing that annually in terms of any inflationary uplift. What's proposed is an uplift of 5% on each banding from September 2021. That sounds a lot when you look at inflation rates, but actually what we've modelled and what we've tried to look at is the fact that, again, as I touched on, pay and pension grants are now incorporated into baseline funding rather than coming separately. So we believe by uplifting bands from September by 5%, that protects Addington from the loss of the direct grants and ensures that the budget still incorporates those into the baseline and provides for a modest inflationary uplift. We've looked at doing that from September to align to academic years, because it also allows then in each of our annual budget setting cycles time to communicate that to other local authorities, etc., and ensure we don't sort of fall foul of any sort of communication issues there. But we have also looked at, given that it won't come in from September, we've allowed for in the budget that the April to September impact of the pay and pension grants to still fund that directly, to make sure that Addington don't lose out from that. Moving on to Chiltern Way.
Lynn, if I can just hang on for a second. I noticed that Darren had his hand up, and it probably refers to a point further up. So, Darren, is there something you want to introduce now rather than at the end?
If I could, Chair, if that's okay.
Please.
It's just a quick question. We've got on page 54 the list of all the resource bases in Wokingham and their place funding. But what we don't have is how many of those places are taken up this year and in previous years, to enable us to make an informed judgment about whether more places are needed at each of those individual resource bases or less.
Yeah, absolutely. Then I take on that point. So I think the activity information we've got here, as I said, I suppose is starting to build what an ongoing pack would be. We very much see the review of resource bases, and obviously everybody involved in that sort of information is absolutely what's being worked through. And what I'm proposing is, where something is useful to have on an ongoing basis, we can certainly look to incorporate that into the activity information going forward. But I would be proposing that, as well as that, in terms of as we move through the year, we would almost do a sort of deeper dive on certain areas at each forum meeting, which would allow us the opportunity to bring out a greater level of detail for forum. Does that help at all? Or
it does. The information was requested, I think 3 months ago. So I'm wondering why it's not available just yet.
We can certainly circulate that with the minutes, if that's helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And it would sound as if that's the sort of rolling information that would be very useful, and leave aside the frequency with which you update the figures. But if this is the starting point for a calculation a model for the budget for this coming year, if we can now start to add the actuals against your modeling, I think that gives a wonderful platform to understand as we move through the year and then start to plan next year just where the resources need to be allocated.
Yeah, absolutely. So just, sorry to take things out of order, but just skipping on to Appendix C. And so in terms of the Appendix overall, Appendix B is in terms of place funding that's set across various headings and settings. Appendix C was then activity based on WBC funded top-ups. The April information is based on basically the current information that we had, that we assume will still be the position come April, so the current position for the academic year. So that gives you an idea of I suppose, of actuals of where we are. And exactly that's the September figure is our projection of what September might look like. And the intention would be to absolutely continue to update that so that we can see how close or otherwise we were to our assumptions, so that any change in that initial forecast, we can all clearly see what factors have driven that. But then I completely take on board, and it picks up on something that Karina had raised with me as well, just in terms of splitting out that resource-based information and a bit more information, so that we can take account of what are empty and what are funded by other local authorities. So we'll certainly look to do that.
Thank you. Darren, you okay with that?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, Lynn, we interrupted. If we can run back to, I think you're at special schools.
Yep, thank you, Chair. So moving on to Chiltern Way, obviously that arrangement taken over from Northern House has been in place for a number of months now. That's the information and the financial model for that for the first 3 years are based on the service level agreement. So that's all set out within that, and again there's some activity information on there. So there's no decision on that at this point needed related to that. Independent and non-maintained special schools, clearly still the single biggest challenge we've got. That there is no getting away from that. It's the area that we come back to time and time again. The work obviously continues, and the plan in terms of how the profile of those individuals and where they drive down and how many years it takes to get that, having invested in local provision, is clearly one of the key drivers and factors to us getting to the point of a sustainable budget position. Again, we've tried to set out a bit more of a breakdown on that, but I appreciate we can continue to develop that in terms of giving Schools Forum the clarity they need. Obviously, we're continuing to review how information is recorded to ensure that we can clearly let you know how things progress, for example, of the number that are jointly funded or between social care and or health, and how that changes over time. So again, that will be a key area for continuing to develop that reporting as we move through the next months. Moving on to post 16 colleges and further education. So again, as we've spoken about before, we know that this again has been a key driver in terms of the overall position, with the extension of the SEND regulations to those aged up to the age of 25. We've obviously had a number of years whereas in before, young people might have aged out of high needs block funding. They've continued to stay until the age of 25, and therefore that cohort has continued to rise. We don't believe we're quite at the peak of that yet, and therefore the activity figures and the figures that build up the September financial projections assume a further 13% rise for the 21-22 academic year. We do believe, however, that from that point on, sort of overall things should start to level out. But again, that's something that we want to continue to develop that modelling and keep a close eye on as we move through this year. Moving on to pupil referral unit, and this is another key part in terms of planning for this year. So we have obviously kicked off a review in conjunction with Foundry in terms of a review on not just the funding model, but the overall strategic alignment for Foundry and how the funding model aligns to that. That review obviously is planned over a period of time in the next 6 to 9 months. And we always knew that given the complexity of it, we weren't going to be in a position to have that finalised to feed into the 21-22 financial year, but we would plan that for 22-23. We did, however, need to recognise the financial projections and the position that Foundry is in. For 2021, So the current financial year, we factored in an inflationary uplift into their budget, and in very base principles, we would assume that the same for 21-22 until that review work and review programme concluded. But we've been working with Foundry to look at their own financial projections in terms of actually the financial challenge that they have for the coming year, and it is significant. There is no doubt about the fact that, you know, increasing costs generally, the fact that they have expanded premises and what that's able to allow them to do to offer the sort of fuller provision that they were not able to do before has driven increased costs. But we also needed to recognise that we need to do that work together to work out actually what the funding and budget model should be. So in figures in the appendix, what forum members will have seen is that we have, in terms of the Foundry sort of standard budget line, we have applied an inflationary uplift to that, as we did this year, but we've also factored in effectively a sort of a revised operating model Foundry additional budget line of 400,000 into there. And really the basis for that is that we fully expect that Foundry will not be able to deliver services within the core budget as it stood for the coming financial year, and that we will need to supplement that as we go to ensure that they don't fall into a significant deficit. But we need time to work through and ensure that we apply that and we feed that budget out in an appropriate manner aligned to sort of agreed service delivery and strategic planning. So again, taking the opportunity of additional resources feeding through from the 0.5%, effectively we've earmarked that 400,000 as sort of additional budget to feed into the Foundry review. It will be held centrally initially, but it will be purely to support and supplement the Foundry budget over the next 12 months as we move through that review, review timetable. Any drawdown and use of that funds will be based on recommendations from the project group, which is council officers and Foundry working together. So the governance of the programme will ensure that it's recognised how that's being used. But clearly, and Ian may want to come in and say something, you know, clearly they face a significant challenge, and we felt that we needed to recognise that and provide some reassurance on how we support them through the next 12 months until we have a more fundamental and new funding model moving forward.
Do you want to just take a break there, Ian?
Yeah.
So my understanding from what you've just described, Lynn, is that you've built a budget for next year based upon historic information. You can see that the funding available wouldn't support the level of activity that is needed. You've allocated 400,000, which interestingly, and thank you for that, has potentially come from the transition of 0.5% across from the schools block, and you are using that to supplement the base figures to ensure that the level of activity that is needed can be funded. Yes, that's correct. And Ian, is that some level of comfort that you're going to be able to deliver what you need to deliver over the next period of time?
It is. You know, we've obviously gone through quite a comprehensive review with Lynn and her team already, and you know, it's great that they recognise that, you know, the budget line and the review hasn't been done in quite a significant period of time, and that our projections starting from next year are that, you know, we will unfortunately go into a deficit due to the increased programme that we can offer our students of ensuring they get their allocated 25 hours of entitled provision. So having that amount that has been earmarked is fully supportive. I'm glad that that it's been recognised that we are facing serious challenges here, so that in order to make it fair and equitable, that it has been centrally held, and that everyone is clearly expecting us to go into that, but it will be done on a measured approach, and that's going to be open to everyone to see.
Thank you. Lynn, if you'd like to go on, please. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair. So moving on to hospital education. Willow House, obviously situated at Wokingham Community Hospital, is our in-borough hospital education. Forum members may remember that this time last year, we looked at, again, at Willow House School. Again, like many settings, their budget had remained static for a number of years. There is a specific hospital education factor in the high needs block. That increased 8% last year and increased 8% again this year. In recognition of the fact that there previously been discussion around, the previous discussion around Willow House was previously about location and geography and where it was situated. Last year, we'd taken a decision to make a step change to increase their budget, recognising that if Willow House in its current format had relocated out of borough, then longer term our high needs block funding formula would no longer have had that hospital education factor in it in its current format, and that therefore we needed to try and align that factor to hospital education resources so that if and when that situation arose, we weren't left with another black hole and headache from elsewhere in the budget. Given the situation and obviously in terms of service redesign that's been taken forward with Berkshire Healthcare Foundation Trust around the Willow House unit more broadly, again, what forum members will see is that there's a small increase to the base budget of Willow House, again factoring in things like pay and pension grants, but we've used the balance of the hospital education factor as a service redesign line, again earmarked so that we've got that held there until we know what the next stages and the outcome of that review will be.
Okay.
Moving on, so inclusion group funding. So again, forum members will be aware there's been £150,000 in budget for exceptional needs funding that's been held within the high needs block for a number of years, but in more recent years spend against that has been very little. The inclusion group has obviously been working very hard behind the scenes, and good progress has been made in terms of actually I suppose the previous use of how that money was taken forward and retargeting that in a different way. The forecast for the current year is around 77,000, so obviously still clearly short of the 150. However, given the fact that progress has been made while it's still been a very difficult year, we've taken the decision to retain the 150 sort of inclusion group funding, if you will, in the budget for 21-22, based on feedback for the group and the progress that they've started to make and the impact that has. And again, some information from the group has been included in the report on the key areas that have been identified for taking forward over the next 12 months. I'll let you read that at your own leisure. Moving on, section 13 is then around the SEND Innovation and Improvement Programme. So we've obviously included in the appendices some information that was circulated more broadly in terms of the next phase of the work and the programme of work that is obviously recognised that needs to be taken forward around high needs block and SEND strategy more broadly. I'm sure Carol and Sal will probably want to pick up on that a little bit more, but obviously we've recognised that in terms of actually being able to deliver some of that work in the short term and to ensure that we can move on at pace, there's a need for some sort of short-term investment in terms of delivering that. The proposal is therefore that 300,000 is earmarked from the high needs block in year effectively as a sort of non-recurring spend to save allocation that would support the work that needs to happen. So the actual delivery of the actions that have come out of the next stage of planning to actually get that embedded on the ground and drive forward the improvements. We've looked in conjunction and recognition of how the council recognises the priority and the complexity of this and the need for change and the complexity of being able to take that forward, that 300,000 from the high needs block will be match funded by 300,000 that we've identified from improvement programme funds that are held on the general fund on the council side to give a core programme support to ensure that we can actually deliver those changes and embed them on the ground.
So there's effectively a £600,000 change programme funded half by the high needs block, half from council improvement funds to really embed this the change programme that you're recommending, or that Sal and Carol are promoting.
Yes, that's correct.
Brilliant, thank you.
Okay, shall I move on? So yeah, so just in terms of financial summary, so we have, and you will see in the appendices, we've obviously recognised that we have £2.8 million resources higher, but there still remains a significant challenge to delivering a balanced budget. You know, that feels like I can't say that strongly enough. We know that the significant increases we've seen in the number of children and young people within EHCP continues to outstrip the available resources. And I think talking to anybody around the table, no one expects that level of increase to drop off in any way. Obviously, recognising that this is not just a Wokingham issue. Budgets have been set to take account of the current profile of EHCPs and based on the best information and projections that we have, but clearly they are a set of assumptions, and by providing that activity data, hopefully we'll be able to show you how that changes over the coming months as we update that. But despite the resources that have come in and given all that, early indications are that there's a potential deficit of £2.5 million for the coming financial year, despite the level of additional resources that have been input into there. I think the key theme for the coming year is recognising that, you know, an increasing deficit is not where any of us want to be in any way. But I think the key theme for the next 12 months is absolutely about how we're continuing to make those incremental changes to ensure that we're investing resources in borough wherever possible, so that those longer term savings delivery of those more expensive out of borough placements in particular, that we really start to turn that tide.
Thank you, Lynn.
There's just one final paragraph, was just really to make everyone aware that the DFE have launched a consultation on the Heinies Block funding formula for 22-23. I would say it's a very limited consultation. It's only really looking at a number of small changes rather than any sort of overall fundamental overhaul, because clearly that's going to come in their next stage of their national review. But I've included a link to the consultation there. If anyone has any interest, obviously anyone can respond. It's not just open to local authorities. It closes on the 24th, so we're obviously looking at that internally. If anyone's got any comments and they want to feed them back to me, then we're more than happy to take that on board.
Thank you. Can I open to the floor for questions for Lynn or Sal and Carol if it's a more strategic oversight? Okay, I'm not. I've got a couple of questions, if I may, please. I noted in your, and I love, you know me, I love statistics and facts and numbers anyway, but so I love the tables and charts we've got on 54, but I couldn't see the EHCP activity. Did I just miss it? Is there a table that says number of EHCP?
Right, and that's an oversight on my behalf. We will make sure that that's built in. So it's a sum of everything that sits below that, but we can get that table included. We'll get the snapshot and then we can monitor on that going forward.
Good. And given that's one of the areas that we know has always been a slight challenge, would I be right in saying it's about 1,000? I mean, plus or minus a few.
So yeah, so again, in terms of overall, it's significantly more than that. But again, it's what we tried to do in the December report, was set out the total number of EHCPs against the number that are actually funded. So yeah, so I can tidy up that table and make sure that that's in the information going forward.
Okay, because I'd like to get to a point where we understand how many EHCPs we carry out. The cost of them is about £2 million. That gives us an understanding, and I think it is about 1,000. So it's about £2,000 per EHCP, and therefore, if the number of EHCP increases, clearly the cost starts to increase. That would be a useful thing to understand if we could, please.
Yeah.
And another little question. No, I'll leave it. So, any other questions or comments from colleagues? Then yes, I've got. So I can't see. Forgive me, I can't see whose hand, but somebody's. So please unmute and come through.
Paul, it's Shirley. I'm just the table you've just requested. I think it would be useful as well to put the financial figure of how much those EHCPs are costing the local authority at the moment as well on that table, if that could be possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Should be.
Thank you.
Great. If there are no other questions, formally, School Forum has to approve the high needs block budget, not the absolute amount, but the allocation of the individual sums across items. And that is on page, the best page to look at is page 58, Lynn, in terms of seeing where that sits.
Yeah.
Okay. There are two columns on, actually there are three columns, but there are two columns on page 58 which are important, column A and column B. Colleagues may be aware that DfE do not allow, ludicrous word, do not allow a local authority to submit a high needs block budget that isn't balanced, i.e. the income has to equal the expenditure. It is very clear from the great work that Lynn and the team and everybody's doing that the income that we have been allocated or are likely to get in 21-22 is not sufficient to meet the known expenditure that we are going to have in that year. So in your pack, column B, which is described as a forecast, is a more realistic listing of the expenditure levels that we are likely to see in 21-22. You can see that doesn't balance with the income that we are going to get by some £2.5 million. So we are starting the year knowing we are going to have a difference between expenditure and income of £2.5 million. But DfE does not allow us to submit a forecast that says that. So we are having to submit column A, which balances the income and expenditure. And those of you that can see on there, you will see there's a line called independent and non-maintained placements. It's shown in the budget as £5 million and in the forecast as £7.6 million. To make the figures balance, to enable us to submit a column of figures to DfE, the £2.5 million difference has been taken specifically out of that line. So can I first ask, just, is everybody, do we understand the process that has been taken to generate a set of figures that can be submitted to DfE? And I'm assuming I've got no hands and no comments, that there's an understanding that's the process that has been taken. The next piece is, I think, very very important. I am very concerned that the local authority does not believe that we as School Forum anticipate the high needs block budget next year to be balanced. That would be a perception and a piece of information that would be wrong. I asked Lynn and Sal specifically to make sure that the local authority, the senior leadership of the local authority, are aware that we are likely to be recommending a program for next year where we know in advance that it is going to overspend by £2.5 million. So Lynn, Sal, can I ask you, have you been able to make that presentation such that the senior leadership of the authority are aware that that is what we are likely to be approving?
Yeah, Paul, so just to confirm, so that there's been conversation with Graham Ebers in terms of being Chief Financial Officer. Graham, I think, Carol, you can probably add to this from the meeting that was held with them last week. But the medium-term financial plan that the council set and was passed at council last month, and the accompanying CFO report recognised the complexity and the difficulty of an increasing high needs block deficit, and you know that clearly there is concern over that, but that the recognition that it is a complex area and it's going to take time to solve. And I believe, Carol, that perhaps from yourself and Graham, there would be something sort of formal written communication out just to confirm that. Is that the case?
Yeah, that's correct. It will either come from, well, it's probably come from both of us, but yes. And it's definitely held at the very senior level, and there's an appreciation of all the work that's going on to try to reduce the deficit, but there's also a recognition that we have to submit in the way we are submitting, and that we have a responsibility to try to reduce the deficit. So it is taken very seriously. Even though one might say, because it's not revenue, it's not. It absolutely is held by the 151 office and myself as accountable in relation to the DSG. And we're preparing something in writing. I think Graham sent something out today, so that we'll put something in writing, and then that will be formally recorded.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. So can I ask Darren? I think you've got a comment as well.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. About resource bases again. If a number of our resource bases places are filled with out of borough, should there not be an income line for out of borough resource space places in Appendix F, or am I missing it?
The income for the top ups for those go to the individual resource bases. It doesn't come back into the high needs block.
So does that mean that where the high needs block is funding all of the places, but if a place in a resource base is filled from an out of borough student, the resource base receives that funding as well?
Yeah, so the high needs block covers the place funding for all places that are commissioned, and the funding formula and the import-export adjustment seeks to take account of that. But in terms of the top-up element, the high needs block, the Wokingham high needs block only plays top-up for Wokingham pupils. So that's why, in terms of this sort of, sorry, let me ping down to some of the tables. Oh, gone too far. So that's why if you look at resource base place funding, and again, Darren, I can set far more detail out just to help everyone talk that through. But in terms of, so the high needs block is paying for place funding associated with the places in each resource base. But what you then see is when you actually move on to the physical WBC funded top ups, the overall numbers is a lot lower. So the high needs block only picks up the top up element of Wokingham pupils. Other local authorities' high needs block pick up the top up for theirs, and that's income into the individual school rather than back into our high needs block.
Okay, thank you for that.
So Brian, I've got your hand up, but before we just move on to Brian, so Lynn, forgive me, does the total of 25.9 million, does that represent the total spending across the borough on high needs block activities, or is it only the spending on those high needs block activities that are not funded by out of borough income?
It's the cost to the Wokingham high needs block of supporting. So I suppose if you think about it in two parts, place funding is about what we've commissioned as a local authority in local settings, and as I said, the national funding formula uses that information as part of setting our overall high needs block allocation. It doesn't, so that our overall high needs block spend doesn't necessarily capture all the costs of all the activity that's happening. It captures the cost of the activity that Wokingham is liable to pay for. I don't know if that helps.
That is clear, but seems a little unusual. Why wouldn't we see the total cost of activity to support young people that need this level of high needs activity, and the total income, of which 20 million is going to come from DFE through Wokingham, and another number is going to come from out of the borough in, so that one would see the total expenditure and the total income. Wouldn't that give us a much better feel for activity and what it costs? Otherwise, we're seeing only half the picture, or not 80% of the picture.
So certainly in terms of an information and understanding, I mean, that's a wider piece of work we could look to do. I suppose all those individual income lines from out of borough pupils all sit within individual school budgets. So we would need to, in terms of reporting schools block and overall individual schools positions, we would need to try and extrapolate that out. So in terms of financial reporting,
it's less relevant for very clinical financial reporting of what we have responsibility for. I can see, Paul, how in terms of overall getting an overall picture that may be useful, but that would be quite an exercise. We'd need to look at how that was possible to take that forward, because individual schools enter into arrangements with pupils from other local authorities, for example, that from a finance perspective we wouldn't necessarily see the detail of.
Okay, let's keep that on in the back of our minds potentially as a future improvement of the quality of information that we're sharing. Sorry, Brian, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, something made it. It's just in the chat there was two things raised. Sarah just stated that there's 1,270 Wokingham funded EHCPs. And Ben had a question regarding a certain line. Ben, I don't know if you're there because I don't think Lynn picked that up.
Yeah, we've put that deficit in budget entirely attributable to special schools that are either independent or non-maintained. That's one of the most expensive parts on that budget line. Are we, does that say, if I'm misunderstanding, we're just simply saying, well, we're writing off a whole load of money to independent schools?
I think we're saying that we are producing a mathematical calculation that balances, and for simplicity, we're taking out of one line rather than trying to find a way of allocating it across a number of lines.
I think that also plays it. Sorry, it's Sal here. That also plays into our innovation and improvement work around looking at how do we seek to make less use of the independent and non-maintained sector going forward, where we might be able to provide within borough. So that's an area where we've got a bit of focus already around how do we make sure that we're only using independent and non-maintained where we absolutely have to.
Thank you, Sal. I can see another hand on my screen up, but forgive me, I can't identify who. So please, if you have a hand, do you want to unmute and just?
I think it's me, Paul. It's Karina.
Okay, thanks, Karina. Come on.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to what you were talking about with Lynn about the place funding for out of borough. I think Lynn's right. It might confuse issues because having a resource base myself, I've got 6 children that come out of borough, and literally there's a charge to them which comes straight into the resource base to pay for the staff, and it's not in relation. It's not related at all to the Wokingham High Needs block. It's not a charge to Wokingham. It's not for Wokingham children, and I think it could get really messy if finance had to report on that. Well, very confusing for everybody, if that makes sense.
Yep, thank you. That does. Children. Thank you, Karina. Yep, that's clear.
Can I ask that the place funding that comes out? It's Carol. Sorry.
Hi, Carol. Yep.
Yeah, comes out of the Wokingham High Needs block. Is that charged to the boroughs that are placing children in our school? Do they pay a contribution to that place funding as well as the top up? And the other comment I wanted to make was just to say thanks to the team for the quality of this information. It's so much better than it used to be.
Excellent, Carol. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Carol. That's very much appreciated. In terms of the place funding, no, other local authorities don't. It works the same in every local authority, that the places that are effectively commissioned in your settings in borough, the host local authority pays that. But as part of when the DFE set our high needs block allocation, when they look at the import-export adjustment, which to me always sounds very clinical because we're talking about children here, they take account of how, for each local authority, how many of your own pupils you educate within another borough, and how many other boroughs' pupils you educate within your own, and they make an adjustment on that net import-export, if you like, to compensate for the fact that you're having to pay place funding for places that are occupied by non-Wokingham pupils.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, can I just, I'm going off slightly at piece, but I did wonder, I'm conscious that there's so much that the more we look at the high needs block and the more we get under the figures, the more in terms of all the nuances about how funding works. We'd obviously sort of ran an introductory training for forum members before, and I wondered whether there was sort of any interest in maybe out with forum meetings, looking to do some sort of high needs block intro to the funding for anybody that might be interested in how some of it works.
Oh, Lynn, you are on fire. What a wonderful suggestion. Not only do we end up with, we have great figures coming in, which we've never seen before. As Carol said, it's wonderful to see. So the concept being that we might run a session either before or after a forum where those that are really interested could sit with you and take this apart.
Yeah, just in terms of the principles of how it works, rather than taking up the main forum time for anyone that was interested, because there might be some of the questions that everyone's got that actually we could talk through in that less formal setting, that might help, so that we can then work out how we make best use of the formal forum agenda.
Outstanding suggestion. Can I leave you and Luciana, and I'll help as well, but to try and sort something out? That would be brilliant. Yeah. I'm now looking around for other comments before I formally ask us to recommend the budget, or the budget and the forecast as being the set of figures that we'll be using to measure performance on high needs block over the next year. I've got no hands up. Given the shortcoming in my technology, it maybe if you've got in, I'm not hearing anybody say, yeah, Karina, yeah.
Sorry, Paul, I was just voting. I'm getting ready to vote.
Then could I ask, please, colleagues, to vote whether we will accept columns A and B as our budget for our budget and forecast for high needs block next year. Luciana, I'm hoping you're getting I've got 2, 4, 6, 8 hands. 9, 10, 11. I think that's unanimous, but again, just because the technology might be failing me, if there's anybody who has an objection or a point they'd like to make, please could you just take yourself off mute and share that with me directly. Okay, so I've not heard anybody, so please can I assume that we unanimously recommend the budget, or the budget and the forecast, those 2 columns. Can I suggest, with all due respect to the budget figure, unless we are required by regulation, that we now leave that whole column aside for a year and report against the forecast, if that's what we believe is our best picture of likely activity for next year?
Yeah, we're certainly happy to take it forward on that basis, Paul, if everyone's in agreement. Yeah.
Thank you. If there's nothing else on item 47, could we move on? And I'm very conscious of time, and even though I know we lost a half an hour at the beginning, I'd like to try and move forward quickly. We've got a couple of AOBs to do. So could I move on to item 48, the Oak Tree SEND school? Sal, yeah. Carol, back into you. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I introduce Sarah Morgan?
Sorry, Chair. You missed one item.
Oh, you're right. 47. Yeah, we'll come back to that. Thank you. Well done. Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah. If I can introduce Sarah Morgan, who's Regeneration and Planning Manager, who's going to take us through this item. Sarah's been assisting in kind of leading some of the development in respect of the building provision. And then, unfortunately, Chair, I have to leave because I do have a meeting with the DFE promptly at 12. But I'm going to hand over to Sarah now.
Then hang on a second, please, Sal, because sorry, Sarah, forgive me. I appreciate you've sat through an hour and a half of this already. Before you go, Sal, I'm aware there's one AOB that I think Amanda, you'd specifically asked to put on the agenda, and I think it concerns admissions. And Sal, once you've gone, we won't be able to do it. So could I ask, can we put a hold on 48 for the moment? Amanda, do you want to just push your AOB forward and talk to Sal?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for just bringing it forward. I'm really grateful. I do realise that there's a task finish group regarding admissions. I am part of that group, but I am deeply concerned about what seemed to be a bit of a last-minute rush to allocate places to students this time around. I've prepared sort of 5 questions that I would ask for a response from the local authority, and these questions don't necessarily reflect the common view held across schools. I would just like a response from the local authority. It doesn't need to be today. It could be a written response later on that's circulated amongst committee members. So the first one was, could we have a formal response about why we found ourselves in the position with admissions we have done this year, the secondary admissions, the week before National Offer Day, where when a primary bulge has been noted by Piers Brunning in his reports, you know, that there was going to be a bulge in the next 3 years, but we still found ourselves in this last minute rush. My second question is, I think it's really important that for transparency, there is an explanation around the decision making as to which schools were requested for additional places and why that happened. So what was the decision making around the order of schools being asked when we still had schools that were not full? So I think that's really important. Number 3, please can the LA confirm that they met their statutory deadline for EHCP placement? If not, please can the LA confirm that all EHCP in year 6 have now been placed for September 2021? Question 4, I have, it's critical that schools understand the population data in order to financially plan. And, you know, as we all know, financial planning impacts everything in schools. Without the regular consultation of the admissions group over the last couple of years, there's been a lack of information and therefore a lack of working in partnership, really. I'm not saying that that's necessarily intentional. I'm just saying that that's kind of the situation. Please can the LA provide the primary admission data as soon as possible in order to support schools with budget planning going forward, and assure that the sharing of data will be one of its top priorities going forward. I know it is one of the things that we've discussed at the task finish group, but it's really key, and we do need that information. I have requested the primary figures, but was told at the time I couldn't have them. And number 5, you know, sadly, the local media seem to be inferring that academies are to blame for the current admission. I mean, I appreciate that I'm not an academy. Obviously, the local authority are not responsible for media coverage. I fully appreciate that. However, please can schools be reassured that elected members have been briefed accurately about what's happened with admissions recently. Now, I appreciate that that's quite a lot, but I'm happy to forward those on to Luciana so that then she can forward them on to Sal in order for that response to be formulated. But I just feel it's important to air those views now in this forum.
Thank you, Amanda. Yeah, I appreciate that. And Sal, really sorry to have squished that in, and appreciate you to rush. We will capture those formally, Amanda. They'll go into the minutes, and we'll give Sal and the team an opportunity to come back and answer those. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much.
Yeah,
and Sal,
absolutely.
thank you very much.
A response back. Thank you, colleagues.
Great. And I've got a hand up as well.
Yeah, Sal, before you disappear off, can I add a question 6 to that, please? And I second all of those questions that Amanda's put forward, and I would ask Chair that we could have a deadline in place for actually a formal response to those requests. But could we have a update as to why Wokingham choose not to share the names and the contact details of those who have been offered to our schools when many other boroughs, actually, I haven't found one that doesn't share the information. So normally in a borough, you get the names on offer day, or just before, actually, in many boroughs, the names and the contact details of all the people who've been offered a place at your school, and we don't get that. And the local authority's decision not to release that to head teachers, I'd like a formal response on that as well, please.
Fine, I can see Amanda scribbling that down, so I'm hoping she's added it to the list. So we've got a 6th question. Thank you, Shirley. It's an unusual position to be, but whilst we're at that point, I know there's a task and finish group, but this might be an opportunity. If there are any concise questions like that we could add to the 6, I'm just looking around. Or are you happy at the moment that we get an answer to those 6? Thank you for the prompt on the timing, Shirley. Let's suggest that Sal comes back by the next meeting. That's July.
Chair, I'll endeavour to respond back sooner than the last meeting, because I do recognise the the level of challenge and interest in this particular area. So I will seek to get a response back to colleagues sooner than that.
Could I suggest then?
I'm afraid. Sorry.
Yeah, let's pick a time then. Could we say Easter? Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, that would be reasonable.
Thank you.
I'm afraid I do have to go, colleagues. My apologies.
Thanks, Sal. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Shirley. And is it Sarah? Sarah, I apologise profusely that we interrupted you. I'm also so please can we hand back to you. As you can gather, we're hopping around and time is very short. So without,
I will keep it very brief.
Thank you.
Sarah, are you okay just to, Paul, I've got to go too. I'm sorry, I've got another meeting. So are you all right, Sarah, to kind of do that without any kind of children's services officers?
With any education
Field anything for you?
Yes, that's fine. If they're detailed education questions, Carol, I'll come back to you.
Okay. All right. Sorry, Paul, I've got a UNICEF meeting, so I need to go off. Thank you. All right. Okay. Bye.
Okay, thank you very much. So as I'm Sarah Morgan, I'm the head of development in the commercial property team. As Carol referenced, I'm not a children's services officer or an education expert, but I'm here really just to give a very quick update on the plans for the new SEND school that the council is proposing at Winnersh Farm in Winnersh. There isn't a decision needed by the forum today, and there's an update report, so I'm not going to go through it in detail because I'm conscious of time, but really it's just to flag to the forum the progress that is being made. So this is a new SEND school for all ages of 150 places. It's a shared provision between Wokingham Borough and Reading Borough. The site identified is a site at Winnersh Farm, and there's a location plan in the reports, which is to the east of Winnersh in Wokingham Borough. That site has been leased to the Department for Education for the school from the Borough Council, and we are working with the Department for Education and their contractor Reds 10. Their current programme is, we're working backwards. The school is programmed to open next September 2022. So part of my job where I'm responsible is making sure they meet their timescales in terms of planning, design and then delivery. So the start on site will be subject to planning in the autumn this year. I think that's probably it, really. I see Richard's just messaged saying he's on the call. I don't know if there's any questions about admissions and that type of thing, but it's just to give people the heads up that it's happening. There's information in the report. We are at the moment out to public consultation on the principles of the SEN school, and also there is some housing development going adjacent to it on the site. And that concludes at the end of April, and then that will feed into a planning application process that will run through the summer. I think that's probably it, unless anyone's got any very detailed questions. As I said, there's a report there with my contact details on and Sal's as well. So that's all needed to say, really, I think.
Thank you, Sarah. Colleagues, do we have any questions for Sarah? And thank you very much for keeping that as brief as you do. I really appreciate it. And there's a lot of really good detailed information there. I'm not seeing any hands come up. So if I can thank you for that report, Sarah.
That's okay, no problem.
Luciana, also thank you very much for commenting. I missed out item 47, which is an important one. So if we could pop back, please, quickly to item 47, which is the Central School Services Block Budget. Catherine, am I handing over to you for that?
Yes, you are. So
Great,
I mute myself. Right. Okay. So Central School Services Block. It's gone up slightly this year. It was 936 last year. We've got 945 this year. It's increased by 9k, which is to cover the Teachers Pay and Pension Grant for essentially paid teachers. And funnily enough, that 9k is actually an increase on what we're getting charged for our copyright licenses that gets top sliced in the DSG. So really, we haven't had an increase at all. And as we say in the report, it's just a contribution towards our statutory services that we do at Woking Borough Council. It's about £2 million, and this is less than half of that to put towards that. So just asking for Schools Forum to agree to this, to the way that we've allocated the funds.
Yep. So our decision is not about the amount of money. It's our judgment as to your allocation of the limited funds you've got to a set of individual lines.
Yes.
Okay. Colleagues, do we have any questions of Catherine around the allocation of this £900,000 to a number of line items that are handled by the central service, the central schools budget. I can't see any hands up, and I've not got anybody chatting. So could I formally ask us, please, to approve the allocation of that of the funds to those lines? Could I ask people to vote, please? Again, let's hope technology isn't too horrendous. I'm looking for hands up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, now my screen's not showing. Luciana, I think that is unanimous, but again, I'll do the same thing. If there's anybody, please, who would like to question that or would be voting against it, please could you verbally tell me, just so that I'm sure that my technology hasn't completely failed. I've not heard anything. So Luciana, please, if we could mark that up as unanimously approved or recommended.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Then, with apologies that we are already gone 12 o'clock, and it's not a good thing. If I can move on to any other business, Amanda, as you heard a little bit earlier, had some any other business which I knew was important for Sal to hear. Can I please go across forum and ask others if they have any other business? I'm not got the greatest of screens to be able to tell me. Catherine, anything from you?
No, not from me, thank you.
Shirley?
No, none for me, thank you, Chair.
Lynn?
Not from me, thank you, Chair.
Carol?
Not from me, thank you.
Brian?
No, thank you.
Darren?
Not from me, thank you, Chair.
Luciana, have I made any other mistakes? Do I need to, are we okay at the moment? No?
Are you just noting the forward plan, Paul?
I will do that, yes.
Okay.
Amanda, anything more from you?
Nothing more from me, thank you, Chair.
Okay. Karina?
Mine's related to the forward plan, Paul. Do you want me to wait?
Oh, no, great. Go on, bring it up now.
I just noticed that we've got a decision needing to be made on the de-delegated budget in December. Yes. We did say that we would have a review of the lines in that de-delegated budget with more schools academising, and I'm aware of time and how long a review takes. Can we get that started ASAP? Task and finish group to look at that, please.
Excellent. Lynn, can we put that in your court to arrange that? Karina, do I take that as a volunteering from you to?
Yeah, happy to be on that.
Really, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I had intended to cover that under matters arising. So, Karina, thank you very much for reminding me. I had sent something out round Maintain School Forum members previously on a sort of proposed timeline, and I had committed to get a communication out to all Maintain schools. I appreciate that hasn't gone out yet, but it will go out prior to the Easter holidays, on the basis that we would undertake the bulk of the review during the summer term, so that we could start to feed in at the output from that into the budget consultation, and actually think about the good progress we made on the budget consultation on the schools block this year, how we make that a more rounded consultation around any decisions around any of the blocks that we might want to consult with all schools on, so that we've still got time to take that forward before December. So thank you, Karina, for reminding me, and comms will come out before the Easter holidays on that.
Thanks,
do I have any other volunteers who at this stage would be able to put themselves forward?
Paul, I think there's only about 4 or 5 of us who are maintained. So it makes sense for all 5 of us to be part of that group.
I would be happy with that. It's whether you are all comfortable.
I am. I just think it's as long as Carol and I think Emma and Liz, along with.
Then Brian, can I leave you, Lynn, Karina, just to put that together and put that? That's great. Thank you.
Yep.
That's excellent. Ian, anything from you? Any other business?
Not from me, thank you, Paul.
Lucia, now I'm struggling. Sarah, anything from you?
No, thanks, Paul.
Julia?
Not from me, thank you.
Ian Morgan? I think I've lost Ian Morgan.
Oh, I answered to the other Ian.
Oh, okay. I'm fine. Okay, sorry. Ian Thomas, then. Anything from you?
No, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Who else? Graham, anything that you'd like to share?
No, I haven't got anything. The contentious items, I think, about admissions are being discussed, so that's fine.
Thank you. Colleagues, if I can, Graham very, very kindly also, immediately after our IT troubles this morning, pinged a note into the local authority to say, this is what we are doing. We want to clarify that this was an entirely a reasonable approach to take, given we couldn't broadcast it. Thank you for doing that, Graham. Really appreciated. Who else have I got? Emma?
Nothing for me, thank you, Paul.
Sean?
No, all good, thanks.
No, fine. Chris?
No, thank you.
So I fear I've missed somebody off my list. If there's anybody who, forgive me, I haven't asked personally, but yet has an, could they shout now? If not, then fine. One of the things I would like to add to the forward agenda for July, a brief discussion on virtual meetings. By the time we get to July, lockdown may have changed. I'd like us to consider whether we think this type of forum actually makes better use of time than meeting formally, etc., etc. So if we could add that to our forward plan as well.
Perhaps I can give you a brief update on that, Paul. We have to adhere to government guidelines for virtual meetings, and that's under discussion. As it currently stands, virtual meetings will cease to exist in May, but everybody's lobbying the government to pass legislation to allow for virtual meetings to continue, or for us to be able to hold hybrid meetings where some people will want to come into the offices, other people could join. So that's something that's being decided.
So at the moment, is our July meeting face-to-face? Formally?
Yeah. We hope that the legislation will be extended. So the Coronavirus Act that introduced the allows us to hold formal public virtual meetings expires in May at the moment.
Okay, so are we just waiting to find out what happens, or have we planned July to be face-to-face?
No, we're waiting because we hope that this legislation will be extended.
Okay. But for all of us, we should have the 14th of July in our diaries. It may be virtual, it might be face-to-face, it might be hybrid.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Then if there's nothing from anybody else, can I thank you all for your perseverance this morning. I apologise that we've finished after 12 o'clock, but thank you all very much and look forward to speaking to you all later on in July. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Bye,
Paul.
everybody.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Lynn, if you're still there. No, she's gone.